Okay, so thank you everyone for coming out. My name is Michael Prime, and I will now be talking about my senior thesis, which is Anachronistic Memories, Culling in a Modern Era. So before I get into everything about culling, like what it is, all of that sort of stuff, I'm going to provide some context for what we're talking about. We are going to be talking about the Viking culture, or Norse culture, which typically ranged from 800 to 1066, according to most historians. Places where they're from, their main areas are Scandinavia, Iceland, Greenland, and at one point they managed to get all the way over to North America into Newfoundland, although they were quickly chased off by the natives. But they've also gone all over into Russia, and they actually had a vast network of trade routes that go down into Africa and also through the Middle East to get to Asia. So now a bit more focused history. So culling is a type of singing, and it was typically sung on these fabod, which are summer pastures where they would do all of their livestock farming. They would typically be used June till September during the year, and it was typically split based on gender. All of the men and the sons would be down sort of in the valley doing farming for crops, while the women and the daughters would be up on the mountains looking after the livestock. One of the important things to know is that no mothers were allowed to actually look after any livestock if they had children below 5. I guess because it was too dangerous for them. But these women took care of literally everything to do with the livestock, from herding cattle, milking them, making cheese and butter, but they also went into more household activities such as making brooms, whisks, clothes, all that sort of stuff. These positions were highly sought after by the women because, since there were no men, it was very free. So it allowed all these women independence from their husbands, and I'm sure many people in the audience can sympathize with that. But it wasn't all fun. It was very labor-intensive work. And since it was in the summer up north, their workdays could last up to 16 hours. And of course, plenty of sunlight since it's the farm, so high chances of heat exhaustion and sunburns. The reason why this was such an important job was because animals were their most valuable possessions. In fact, some historians have likened it to if your cow was the money in the bank, then the butter would be the interest on that money. So now to get into the actual culling. So what is culling? It is herding calls used on these fabod. And they are typically described as very eerie and haunting. They echo through the valleys to be able to reach these livestock that are sometimes kilometers away. As I said, since the fabod are mostly run by women, culling is typically sung by women as well, which means that the singing style has evolved from the strengths and limitations of the female voice. So some of the common uses were herding the cattle. That was the main priority. But they also used it to communicate with neighbouring fabod, which could be many kilometres away. And they could also use it to scare off any predators that would be coming for the livestock. So now I'm going to get into the actual detail of the musicality of culling. So the total range when somebody is culling is about a fifth, although it can be sometimes more or less. and the typical culling range is about 800 to 1300 hertz. And for anyone who cannot mentally transfer hertz to actual notes, that would be a G3 to a D6, so a very large range and very high. It could sometimes go as low as about 600 hertz and could go as high as 1400, which would be an F6. So the actual melody of the culling would be a mixture of these high melismatic lines mixed in with the shorter sort of normal range calling. So since it has the high and the low, the whole voice is used for this. And of course, each person, since we are unique individuals, will have their own unique culling range, which means there are no absolute boundaries or any real rules for this. The phrases themselves are built on very short, well-known tunes, typically about 4 to 5 seconds, and then each singer would improvise upon that tune to sort of give it their own personal flair. The variation and improv would basically be improvising rhythm, tonality, the actual melody itself, as well as the gap between phrases. And since these phrases are completely improvised, there is no pulse or structure, it's completely free rhythm. There is no clear end to any particular culling session because you're pretty much waiting for a reply from either the cows or the neighbouring farbode. So that means the singers would have to be able to sing for an unspecified amount of time, just constantly improvising. The lyrics themselves were also improvised and were not so much based on language, but based more on the sound of the syllable. So here are some commonly used syllables for the culling, and these could be held out and held out among several pitches and be very melismatic. So the style of this particular style of music, the singing is typically at the front of the mouth, which means that it is coming out of a very small and narrow space. It has a clear tone and no vibrato, and there is a definite attack and end to each phrase. Since the phrases have a beginning, it is typically created through an anticipatory note. I'm going to try and pronounce this, of an uphamtanunga, and glottal stops. And that thing I just said is a pickup note that is in the general area of the starting note, and then it slides up to where the note actually is. The end of the phrase, since that is also very clear where it is typically ended with a glottal stop, which adds a sort of tail to the end of the phrase. This means that the strongest note is at the end of the phrase, which is opposite to a lot of many other types of singing, where it typically gets weaker as the phrase goes on. So the technique, all the technical aspects, the subglottal pressure is almost always over 40 centimeters of H2O. For a little bit of comparison, normal talking is about 5 centimeters, normal singing is 5 to 20, and then a forte on a wind instrument is about 150. The singing also uses a flexible larynx, which is raised in conjunction with the frequency, which is the opposite of a lot of classical singing. And there is a lot of emphasis on lowering and maintaining the larynx. It is, as it would have to be to carry, extremely loud. It can range up to 125 decibels at 30 centimeters from the source. It is almost always over 105 decibels, but once again, it depends on the person and the pitch being sung. So how loud is 125 decibels? An ordinary conversation is about 50. A pneumatic drill at 3 meters is 90 decibels. A dramatic soprano singing as loud as possible is 100 decibels at 30 centimeters. And a jet plane is 105 decibels. So this is some very loud singing. So here I have a video of an example of this kind of singing. Okay, so now I'm going to show you my own take on this style of singing with my new piece, Anachronistic Memories.